Okay, what weight steel mace you should start with is a very, very common question, and you're going to get a very common answer. Men should usually start with a 5 kilogram and ladies should start with a 3 kilogram. However, if you're here on YouTube, you probably want to know a bit more why. For the most part, steel mace training is very humbling. There's a lot of skill and there's a lot of technique involved. Most beginners, most new people to the art try to muscle the way through the movement. So the most common movement is definitely the 360, okay? Of course, when we start, we're new to it, we're still trying to develop that skill, that competence with the mace. And you can be pretty strong, you can be pretty experienced in the gym. However, that kind of goes against it, is most people try to really deliberately control every movement, and you tend to see a bit more of a halo type movement or a front to back. So people tend to, when they start with the mace in front, dip it backwards over one shoulder, pull the hands over, and then wrench it forward again, which makes it a forward to back motion. Whereas in reality, a 360 is a side to side motion. We have to let that mobility in your shoulders and your elbows run its course. Because we need to build the mobility and the skill, starting really heavy just isn't going to work. You know, like conventional lifting, going really heavy to start with isn't work. You've got to build your strength. Let's take weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting. You don't start really heavy, you go light, build the technique, then build the weight. And it's the same with steel mace training. Now, what weight you should start with is another question. Now, the lightest I can get, at least in the UK, is a 3 kilogram. So if you want to just start right from the bottom and build your way up, it's obviously going to be a 3 kilogram. This is a Strength Shop mace. I have done a little bit of modifications for my classes. I have gone and got myself a 3 kilogram and then cut the end off to make it a little bit shorter for some of my shorter clients. That does make the whole mace a little bit more like 2.5 kilograms, but it really does change the weight distribution. And of course, being shorter, you don't get as much leverage involved in the mace as well. Now, there is a general idea, yes, men should start with a 5 kilo, ladies should start with a 3 kilo. I have got a Wolverson 4 kilo, so you can meet in the middle. It's just one of those things of men tend to be a little bit heavier, so there's a little less, there's a little more anchorage involved. So when you've got a big, I'll use this one as an example, when you've got a mace pulling off out to the side, if you have a really heavy mace, that's really gonna pull you over. If you're heavier, you've got more natural ability to resist that pull. Now, of course, eventually, yes, you want to be able to utilize that force and that pull to your advantage to counter it. But, of course, to start with, we need to learn how to do it. Now, if you're just going for traditional swings, you can afford to go a little bit heavier, but in the first instance, you, of course, want to start light, and I suggest a 5 kilo mace. If, like myself, or you're in a gym that has multiple maces to choose from, I'd suggest, get one. It's nice and firm. It's much more versatile. You can do flow with it. You can do tire slams with it and go on from there. If, however, space is a limiting factor, you're at home, you haven't got the ability to just grab the next mace weight up, you might want to look more into getting an adjustable mace. They're a lot more expensive to start with. However, they give you a lot more progressions to work with. Whereas one single mace is less cost to start with, but when you want the next weight up, you're going to have to buy the next weight up, and then the weight up from that, and buy it, and buy it, and buy it, and buy it. Especially if you're going traditional, you need to work your weights up, so that's going to be a thing. Flow work, you can usually get away with just 1, maybe 2 mace, but I'll come into that in a moment. So, in my hand now is a 7 kilogram mace. Probably not very good for flow work, but is a good next step for traditional 360 work. It's a little bit heavier, but the length is just about the same as a 5 kilo. Now from here, you can probably maybe make out that the handles are the same width, but the heads just get bigger, at least for now. Different brands do different ways. Now, the weight is the entire mace included. So the handle on the 5 and the handle on the 7 are the same, so they will be the same weight. It's just the head that makes the difference. Now, because the head is bigger, that will change the center of gravity on the mace to be slightly higher up. Okay, so that one is just past the knurling on the handle. The 5, the balance point is just about where the knurling meets the smooth part of the handle. Now what that also does is it changes the leverage point as well. So when you go up in weight, not only are you competing with literally more mass, you have to deal with more momentum, so further distance from your fulcrum, being your hands behind your head. So there's kind of like a multiplication factor. And because of that, a 5 kilo mace is not the same as a 5 kilo dumbbell, especially with the weights you're trying to use. So holding 5 kilo on its center of gravity, yeah, it feels like a 5 kilo dumbbell. Hold it out, there's now more leverage, angular momentum that you have to compete with as well. So that's another reason why you should generally start lighter, is because actually, once the mass is in motion, there's a lot more force to compete with, because you're usually competing with more acceleration than gravity alone, which say a free weight dumbbell would be. So if somebody could probably do the math out there and convert it into newtons for me, but 5 kilo dumbbell accelerated by gravity is so many newtons of force you have to resist. A mace, 5 kilo, on the end of a fulcrum, traveling usually a bit faster than gravity would pull it to the floor, because you're going to help it along a bit, that's going to give you more newtons of force to resist. Again, for those that are probably already a bit experienced in the gym, have a bit more strength, you're going to be humbled. Start with a 5. For flow work, generally yes, about a 5 kilo mace is enough, because your progression, your fitness come from skill, not from sheer weight. So your length of time doing the flow, the complexity of the flow. So I'd usually suggest find a weight that kind of sticks with you, normally about 4 to 5 kilo for most people, and that will work. Something I kind of have found, but haven't had enough people to really get a good data point for, is most people tend to flow with about 5 to 6% of their body weight. So I'm about 80 kilo, this is 5 kilo mace, I think that works out something like 6%, something like that. I have a couple of other clients, they tend to be about 5%, so I have a young lady, she's sort of like 50 something kilo, but when we train her on a 5, it's just too heavy, so we train her on the 4 kilogram at most, and a 3 kilogram, especially when we're learning a new flow. Apply that rule, maybe about 5 to 6%, or maybe 4 to 6% of your body weight for flow. For a traditional, start with like a 3 or a 5, and then gradually build your way up. Now, whilst I was on it, and I'm talking about the differences, here we have the 7, and we have a Wolverson 10. Now, what you will see is the handle on the 10 is ever so slightly thicker than it is on the 7, even though the head is also slightly bigger as well. Now, in theory, you'd think that that'd put the center of gravity a lot further down the mace. However, for the 10, not so much, because it's got a thicker handle, a bit more counterweight on the other side. The center of gravity is not quite as far. But then you can go into a very specialist mace, things like the 16 kilo hammer, and I can't even do a balance on this one because the center of mass is directly in the head. And where the center of mass is, as I said before, can really change how the mace reacts. So trying to do a flow with a 10 kilo, it can work, but it doesn't want to flip very well due to how much weight there is, whereas a 5 kilo works a lot better and it wants to flip quite nicely, which is going to work a lot better for flow. However, for traditional work, it really doesn't matter. You just want something heavy, something long, off you go. I'm hoping that puts a little bit more context into not only what weight you should go for, but why you're going for that weight. There are other mace out there, so I have come across like a 2 kilogram wooden mace. I imagine they're fairly even, like for the same length, they're gonna be, the weight distribution is gonna be fairly even. So you're almost using a staff, not a mace, and then combine that with, especially in the UK, you've got to import it from the US. They're already expensive to start with because they're heavy, blah, 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 blah. You might as well just start with a 3 kilogram. Now, I do have another video reviewing Strength Shop versus a Wolverson Fitness mace. I'll link that as well. If you have any other comments on what weight mace you want to start with, or you have used, or your experiences to help other people, please let me know in the comments below.